Okay. All right. We're on. We're on live. It's good to see everybody. My name is Pat Huff, and we are meeting this morning to talk about agendas and topics in education that are on the front burner now and that seem to be getting a lot of attention. And we've got on the Zoom meeting with me, we've got two outstanding education researchers and people in the field that have been working to try to enlighten folks for many years. And so I'm going to just stop for a minute and let them introduce themselves and a little bit about what their wheelhouse is, what they do, and how they work to bring folks up to speed on what is happening with the education agenda that is really hot and heavy right now. So I'm going to begin in letting ladies go first. So Lynn Davenport, why don't you go ahead and begin and tell us who you are?
Okay. Hi, Pat. Hi, Randy.
Hi.
Thank you for doing this, Pat. I so appreciate the work that you do. And so, yes, I've been involved in education as a researcher, really just a parent activist, parent advocate. Started out in roughly 2014. I mean, I was always involved in the schools, PTA and such, and volunteering. And around 2014, they were going to turn our freshman center into an early college high school, which I started researching that. It's Gates funded. So I went down all the rabbit holes and found that much of what we're seeing in the schools is tied to the Gates Foundation, all the way up to the TEA and the federal government. I was really also concerned with the STAR testing, which you and I have talked about over the years, how the stranglehold of the STAR test, how it narrows the curriculum, what gets tested gets taught, and seeing from my oldest child to my youngest child the difference in the education because of STAR testing, I realized what a perversion this is. It's educational malpractice. And I pulled my youngest out and put him in private school for 2 years and then remediated him and put him back in the public school. He's now a senior. I have two in college. For the last 11 years, I've been working as a volunteer for a job ministry, working with unemployed people, since my background is in recruiting. And so I quit doing that last month and have really just been focusing on so many things surrounding education. And so that's pretty much what I'm doing now.
And your podcasts are great.
Oh, yes. And I do have a podcast. Thank you very much. And you've been a guest on my show. Randy, I should have you virtually on sometime to talk about the math standards. But yes, it's called Social Impact. It's on the Offbeat Business Media News Network. And that started earlier in the year. And I've just been covering all kinds of topics. And it's just been, it's been really, it's been fun to do, even though we're talking about heavy topics. I appreciate all the guests and the expertise that I've brought on.
And you've had some great guests. So before we finish today, let's make sure that people know how they can tune in to your podcast. Okay, because sure. I mean, we're really heavy duty, hard.
It's on most platforms. Social Impact with Lynn Davenport. You can search.
Okay. Good deal. Okay, Randy Houchins, the man I consider to be a Texas hero.
I wouldn't go that far. My name is Randy Houchins. I'm a degreed mechanical engineer. I've designed control systems and machinery for the oil and gas industry for the last 27 years. In 2014, I was shocked that what was coming home was homework for my daughter in math. And I started digging into it. And at first, I thought it was a school problem and went to the school board and quickly realized that it was a state standards problem. And so I started looking at the standards and looking at the changes that were made in 2012 that were first implemented in 2014. And it was quite shocking to me. And so to look at what was going on, I started tutoring students, seeing the impact of the of the standards at the classroom level, and was just quite shocked at what I found. And I've got reports I've written to the state board and testimonies, which we can go over later in the meeting. So I'm just an engineer who got concerned about math in Texas and how it was impacting our kids.
And you have been to the State Board of Education to give testimony
17 times.
17 times. And
3 times to the Senate Education Committee and once to the one of the other committees they formed for next generation assessments. So
right, and that's where you and I met for the first time, if you remember.
that's right. Yeah.
It was yeah. Little did we know where that would lead to. But what you have uncovered and what you have revealed to the State Board of Education is nothing short of amazing, because they have refused to implement any of your suggestions, any of your the knowledge that you've given to them and laid right at their doorstep with all of your STAR tests that you've taken and the data that you've accumulated. They have refused to do anything, and neither has the legislature on either of the education panels. So there's a reason for that, and we're going to talk about that today as to why they are not doing anything and why they are choosing to stay with what we have, which is killing our education programs. So what I would like to do now is just give people a quick overview. I am not going to go into any great depth on my research and what my contribution is, but I do think it's important for a lead in to you, Randy, to understand what we're dealing with and why it is important. It is so important to have some degree, not just some degree, but a great deal of pushback against this agenda that is taking place. So we've got a phenomenon going on right now, currently in education, and I welcome it, and I know you guys welcome it too. We've been beating our head against the wall for many years, and there have been others that have been doing this longer, trying to awaken people to what is happening in our public schools. Mothers and fathers have been shaken by what is taking place in the classrooms across America. And the shock of parents having their children taught what is called the social emotional learning and critical race theory has really awakened a sleeping giant. And that's the American parent. You know, mama bears, papa bears are coming out of the woodwork to go and speak before their school boards. And school boards are going, oh, we're not doing anything. And yet we know they are, because it's written into their curriculum. It's on the tablet that the kids are working with. So we know it is being taught. It's just not being called critical race theory. The social emotional learning, we're going to let Lynn get into it much more deeply. But for those of us who've been trying to awaken this giant, who is the parent for many years, people like Charlotte Iserbyt for decades, are marveling at this phenomenon taking place. And due to that, school boards need to be aware. And if you ignore this sleeping giant, you do so at your own peril, because you may find yourself not a school board member anymore. So with that said, I'm going to review just for a few minutes what has happened in our public schools that has led up to this situation that we have. And I'm not going to go that far back, but I will go back to No Child Left Behind, so that those in the audience that haven't heard this before, and some have, but many have not. And because we're awakening now to this education agenda, we want to give parents an idea of why this is happening, why this current state of chaos is going on in the communities that surround the schools. So back in 2002, George W. Bush passed No Child Left Behind, and if you remember, he made a statement. Of those of you who followed that that time period, you'll remember that he made a statement in education about all children being proficient on the test, meaning the state test that they were going to take. At this particular time, the standards had not been completely linked together. States still had some type of control over their educational standards. But anyway, he said by 2014, all students would be proficient on the test due to the passage of No Child Left Behind. And, you know, that flew right over the head of a lot of us that were in education at the time. I was a principal at the time at an intermediate school, which is a middle school in the Klein Independent School District. I was at Kleb Intermediate, and when No Child Left Behind was passed, and didn't realize what was meant by all students would be proficient. But all means all. And
So they say in my district, that's our slogan that they use.
that all students will be proficient.
That's just, they just say all means all. That's just their
All
slogan
means
about
all.
everything, even though they really
So
mean it.
turns out meant 100%. And this would be great if it was just a goal to shoot for. If it was a worthy attainment to get all students proficient. But No Child Left Behind turned that into a law. And so it set in motion a series of progressive percentages that were needing to be met on the way to 2014, which was the deadline for 100% proficiency. So I just want to give you a quick look here at the progression of what these percentages look like. So can everybody see that? Let me expand it a little bit here. So this was called adequate yearly progress. And this is one of my contributions to the education fight that we do, the link between adequate yearly progress and school failure. Because by 2012, we had a phenomenon taking place across America that was called school failure. And it's a very important term to understand because school failure wasn't always the case. It was more student failure. If students didn't apply themselves and work hard and do their homework, then they failed. But now we have a flip taking place and the school is going to fail. And if the school fails for a certain number of years in a row, then there are heavy consequences that take place all the way up to being taken over by the state and turned into a charter school. So this particular program, once it got rolling and the percentages started going up, it created great pressure, great fear in all of the school districts throughout the country, because this was not just in Texas, it was everywhere in the country, every state. Because by this time, No Child Left Behind had entered into the field of school accountability. So these percentages, as you can see, begin to go up every year. And this is the collective percentage that is needed in each subgroup that is divided, that the kids are divided into. This is not what the kids have to make to pass the test. That's a whole different issue. But what we have here is the group percentage. Your white students, your African-American students, your Hispanic students, your social economic disadvantaged students, your special education students, your ELL students, English language learner students. All of these groups collectively, and there are like 11 of them now, come together, and these percentages had to be met in order for the school to get a passing grade for their year's outcomes. And we can see here by 2012, we were at a percentage that caused just about every school in the country to be looking failure straight in the eye. Right here, 87% in English language arts and reading, and 83% was required in math. That meant every subgroup had to hit that percentage. Or if one subgroup failed to meet it, then the entire school failed for that year. Now, these were all in the Title I schools where this was being applied. All the Title I schools. A very important point to bear in mind, because it's the Title I schools that are affected the most by what we call our accountability system. the most unjust, inequitable system ever devised to grade a school on how it's doing on the state test. So I will come out of that, and you can see that these percentages are tremendous. So by 2012, all of the state education commissioners and the governors were hollering for some type of relief. And how can this be that we are failing? We can't control this agenda. It's taking place, and we cannot do anything about it. So we have, by this time, moved from George W. Bush into Barack Obama's administration. And I'm going quick, so hang with me now. So Barack Obama throws the states a lifeline. And I think, as Lynn can attest, I seem to be the only one talking about the waiver. I don't know in your walks, if you've heard anyone else mention the waiver before.
Nope.
Nope.
You're special, Pat.
It is not talked about, but because I was a former principal, I was in this. I was in the mix deeply. Although I didn't realize exactly what was happening, I did afterwards. And so I looked at it from a school perspective. So we had a lifeline given, and it was called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act Flexibility Request. And every state had to get their commissioner to write an application to get the waiver. And so why was it called the waiver? It was called the waiver because if you agreed to the terms of the US Department of Education, if you agreed to their terms, then you got very special areas of No Child Left Behind waived. In other words, you get a free pass, you're out. You don't have to achieve it. And one of the top ones that made the top item that made everybody go for this, every state eventually signed on to it, was not having to be 100% by 2014. And so this is our quid pro quo that was done, because there were special things that had to be agreed to in order to get that waiver. Nothing is ever given for free. And the federal government, the US Department of Education, was not handing out these waivers without having heavy chains attached to them. And those heavy chains, let me just go right here. One of the largest, heaviest chains was to have our college and career ready standards, which was what we called them here in Texas. This was our TEKS that we had already developed. We had to get these to where they were synced with Common Core. Okay, so here we see in the waiver where they incorporated these college and career ready standards into our Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, the TEKS. All right, this is what our—
Notice the legislature, notice it was the 79th legislature. We'll talk about that later.
Okay, good eye. So here we have this incorporation taking place. And in order to get the waiver, you had to sign on to Common Core. That was the deal. You had to sign on to Common Core. There were other provisions too that you had to do, but that was the top one. And what that eventually ended up doing is when every state signed up on the Common Core, then the entire nation was synced into one curriculum standard that drove the curriculum. It drove everything within the schools that is being taught academically. So there's that. Now I want to share page 14 with you. And so on page 14, if you can see where my little X is, we can see overall, it says overall, the Texas standards in the English language arts and mathematics matched 92% and 75% of those in Common Core standards, respectively. So that was good enough for the US Department of Education. and they agreed to give Texas the waiver in 2013. So in 2013, a lot of this work was already done. Not much work had to be done to get us linked in with Common Core. It had already been taking place. But
so when people say Texas said no to Common Core standards, you can say not true.
Not true. And here it is in black and white.
Yeah.
And this is what Commissioner Williams had his team of writers and experts write to submit to the U.S. Department of Education to get the waiver. Had we not agreed to this, we would not have gotten the waiver. It's very important to realize that. Mm-hmm. And so we got the waiver. So we have Common Core. We don't call it that, but we have it.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of Common Core started in Texas with the UT Dana Center.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Yeah, exactly. We had been working on this for a number of years. And so we knew what was in the pipe coming down. All right. So with that said, there were other provisions that had to be agreed to in order to give the waiver. And the most glaring of all was that written into the waiver was this agreement. You had to create your own accountability system that would be approved. That would be approved by the U.S. Department of Education. And so with that, we have one of the provisions that was written by Commissioner Williams was this thing called, we will have 5% of our schools labeled as priority schools every year. And these would be the lowest in their state outcomes from the students taking the test. So the priority schools guaranteed that there would always be a group that would be labeled priority, the bottom 5% in the state. And those would be the ones that would be acted on for remediation. And these could come from anywhere in the state, but it was determined by the student outcomes being the lowest. This guaranteed that there would always be a problem. It kept the cycle going. And Lynn is going to talk a little bit about what that entailed after Randy gives us a rundown on the implications of Common Core and how it has devastated our math programs. And you could take that also into English language arts and reading. Lynn, I believe you had a number of angry parents not too long ago that went before the Richardson School Board complaining about their kids not learning how to read.
Go back to that first page on this document here and look at the name at the bottom. Lizette Reynolds.
Okay, the one where I showed the linkage, but with Common Core.
Just the ESEA, the Michael Williams document. Just whatever you just had up was the. Well, anyway, it shows her name at the bottom. It was just the first page of the.
Right. Yes.
Anyway, she works for Excellence in Education, which is Jeb Bush's deal. This girl here, Lizette Gonzalez Reynolds. So at the time, so she was Chief Deputy Commissioner. Now she works for Jeb Bush's deal, which is tied. The Bushes are part of, or how we got all this.
Excellent. Yeah.
Jeb and George. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So okay, now. With that understanding that we do have Common Core, it is a result of No Child Left Behind. It is a result of AYP progression to drive schools to failure so that they had no choice but to buy into the waiver, which we did. And so that gave us Common Core back in 2013, but we had it before that, but not officially. And not to the degree that we have it now. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to turn this over to Randy. Randy, if you could share with the audience that'll be watching this in the future, just what has been the result of Texas teaching Common Core math.
Sure. We'll start with looking at minimum passing scores, just to show the impact of the new standards. And the fact that we really weren't in that good a shape to begin with. Let me pull this up here. Is that sharing
Yep.
or not?
You got it.
It is? Okay. So we start with looking at minimum passing scores. Move this over. Okay. I pulled this information directly from the TA's website, and here are all the links for each of the years. This is what's called the raw conversion tables. This is how they determine who's passing and who's not meeting expectations. So you have masters, meets, approaches, and did not meet. So to determine what those passing scores are, you take the minimum grade you need to pass divided by the total number of questions and multiply by 100 to get the percentage. And here's a table form of those percentages. So in third grade, for this last school year, 50% is considered passing, 50% in fourth grade, 47% in fifth grade, 39% in sixth, 40 in seventh, 45 in eighth, 35 for algebra 1. 35% is considered passing. So here's what it looks like in graphic form.
And that's out of 100, right?
And that's out of 100%. Yes.
Be clear.
So I converted to percent, so it makes sense to people. So you only have to get 35% of the questions right to pass algebra 1. And you can see here's from the 2012 school year all the way to 2021. Of course, 2020, we didn't have any STAR tests, so that's omitted here. So this dip right here, you see, this is the implementation of the new TEKS. So this is where more Common Core got put in, more emphasis on process versus actual calculation of mathematics. And you can see we've held pretty steady since the implementation of the new TEKS. So we didn't get a big increase in understanding, an increase in test scores. None of that happened. In fact, just the opposite happened. So here's for high school, 35%. And you see we're actually going down in algebra 1. So this is the fall is when most students take, or actually spring. So you see it's going down, not up. But we've held fairly steady for algebra for all of this. And most of the impact of the Common Core processes happens in 3rd through 8th grade. The high school TEKS are actually fairly good if you just remove the emphasis on process standards. So that's that document. Let me share one more.
But what has been the result of the kids' preparation for those high school TEKS by being involved with Common Core math in their foundational years?
Oh, well, here's the percent drop for each of the years since the implementation of the new TEKS. You can see a 10% drop from the previous, before all the emphasis on Common Core. And so these kids don't have the background that they need. They're roughly 2 years behind. It puts calculus out of reach of most high school students. 8th grade looks a little bit better. You see in 8th grade, you see an increase, but that's because there's less of an emphasis on process. When you look at the questions that pertain to process versus calculation, the heaviest emphasis is here in the lower grades. 41% of the questions are not, can you actually solve a problem, but can you recognize a model? And I'll show you an example of models.
Yeah, go into more detail about the process, Randy, so that people understand what you're talking about with that.
And here's what happened in California when they did the same implementation of process versus calculation. They had a huge drop in the amount of students enrolled in 8th grade algebra. And this is directly from NAEP data. I haven't updated this with the newest data that's available. So there's my 17 testimonies to the state board of education.
We're not seeing anything.
Oh, you're not? Oh,
no. Hit that little button down there at the bottom. There we go.
Are you seeing it now?
Yep, got it now.
Okay, sorry. So y'all got these, you saw these graphs
Right.
from the previous. Here's the decrease that I was talking about, 10% decrease in the first year they implemented the new standards. And you can see it's been less each year since they implemented it. In 8th grade, you see a positive, but that's, like I said, because they're testing less of process. Here's the percentages of questions on the 2018 stars, testing process over mathematics or calculations. And you can see algebra is not affected because it's only 2% of the questions on process. This is the NAEP data I was talking about in California. This is where they implemented Common Core, and they had this huge drop in NAEP scores for kids enrolled in Algebra 1 in 8th grade. So there's my 17 testimonies, 3 to the Senate Education Committee, 1 to Texas Next Generation Assessment and Accountability. So if you look at the wording in the standards, chapter 11, 111, subchapter A for elementary, area models called out 9 times, pictorial models 23 times, and standard algorithm only 7 times. So this reform math, like in TEAC 3.4K, it says we're using strategies based on objects, pictorial models, including arrays, area models, equal groups, properties of operations, or recall of facts. This is up to 7 methods that can be assessed. So all 7 methods must be taught. And when you start applying the process standards to that, that's like 49 different ways you can solve a problem. And any of those can be tested on the STAR. So this is what causes the elementary students to get further and further behind, because you just can't get through all the material when you have to teach it this way.
And this is what you're witnessing in Leander with your tutoring
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, this argument of conceptual understanding versus knowledge, it's a bogus dichotomy. And H. Wu put out a good article, Basic Skills versus Conceptual Understanding, a bogus dichotomy of mathematics education. You can find that on the web. It's a really good description of what's going on. It details what happened in California, and it's the same thing that's happening now. So let me pull up some examples of well, that's not pulling that up. Okay.
And, you know, some of the worst offenders, Randy, are mathematicians and engineers and people who are really good at math. And they think that this is a good thing to teach so many different ways to solve an equation, but they don't understand it's not age appropriate. And so they're the ones that think that this is good. They'll say, oh, that's how I do it in my head. Well, they forget that they were given it in the right order at the right age.
Yes.
That's how.
So here's an example of a model. Can y'all see that one on the screen?
Uh-huh.
So how is this pictorial model helpful in solving a basic math problem at long division? It's not, but this is what's required when you say model. This is the types of questions that come up, and you've got, you know, strip diagrams, number lines. None of this is helpful when you get to upper level math. So concrete models, this is the kind of questions that they just really don't help you progress into upper level math. And this is a 6th grade TEAC, still calling for modeling, drawing pictures.
So it just breeds frustration and confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the reports I wrote for the state board. This was 2016 STAR review. So I've presented this information to the state board. Showed them the impact of the new standards, the reduction in minimum passing scores across all grade levels. Showed them the wording, the actual wording in the standards. That's what this is taken directly from the standards, where it says represent using pictorial models, number lines, equations. This is the wording in the standards, in the content portion of the standards, not just the process standards, but in the content portion of the standards that call for these multiple methods to solve a problem. So the teacher has to teach each one of these methods, because any of them can show up on the STAR. So if they want their school to be rated as passing, then they've got to get their test scores up, and they've got to teach all these methods. And this has destroyed the confidence of students. The students I've tutored, a lot of them just have self-confidence problems because they don't understand these modeling. But you teach them, and this whole idea that you don't teach conceptual understanding with the standard algorithm is just ridiculous. But once you've got the understanding of how the algorithms work, then go forward with what's the most efficient way to progress into upper level math. And once you show the students that, their confidence level goes up and they can solve the problems. Now, they might not be able to pass one of these questions on the STAR test because they don't understand the process. But let me show you one more thing. So this is my spreadsheet where I calculated all this, pulling all the current data in. But if you take say the algebra 1 in 2018 and you guess the second answer choice, B or G, for every question, you get a 25%. Now, mind you, 35% is considered passing. So how much do you really need to know to be able to pass this test? Not a whole lot. If you only understand a handful of the questions and then guess the second answer choice for the rest, chances are you're going to pass. How sad is that for our students? And we're starting to get students that have been taught this way through college and interviewing, and it's really obvious that these kids don't have the background that they need to enter the workforce in engineering specifically.
And those are the implications. Those are the striking implications, real life, of what is transpiring now, because this has been in the works now for a number of years. And these kids that started with the Common Core math are now in college and
also teaching. And
some are teaching.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So that's all I really have to share. I just don't want to overwhelm you with all the details, but I can make these reports available in this the last thing I put together on the minimum passing scores. We can make that available online.
That would be great.
People can look at it.
And I will add, as a caveat before Lynn takes the floor, that the number of times you've been to the state board, and some of them have been receptive to your information, and others have not. The majority have not, but others have, and have admitted, and it can be picked up in the audio of I think the 2018 testimony from one of the state board members, that what do we have here? We have a problem with Common Core. Right.
And we had Dr. Milgram, Stanford mathematics professor, renowned professor in mathematics, come in 16th of November of 2016. And he validated everything I'd been telling the state board since the fall of 2014 when I started testifying, and said, what we actually have is worse than Common Core. We took the worst parts and stripped out some of the good stuff, if you can consider there is good stuff in there, and there is, but you cloud it with all this process. He said, we took the worst parts and implemented it in Texas. Well, so we would have been better off just adopting Common Core than what we did in our state standards.
Yeah.
And that's pretty scary.
Yeah, very much. Okay, you want to come out of that, Randy? And
okay.
Let's get it back to where we can just go up to the top and hit stop share.
Yeah, there. Okay.
There.
There you go.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right. So, so we're gonna, the fact that we made a deal with the devil, we made a deal with the U.S. Department of Education through the waiver document, and we are a captured operation. And so this is why now all of the things have been taking place that the U.S. Department of Education wants to have implemented, and actually it goes all the way up to UNESCO in the United Nations that they want to have implemented. And because we are a captured operation, our independent school districts are almost powerless to do anything about it. But the least that they can do is to begin pushing back. The least they can do is begin saying no. The least they could do is to begin going and testify like we've all done in front of the education panels and telling the education people that serve on these committees, the politicians that serve on these committees, that we're not going to do this, and not just no, but hell no, we're not going to put up with it. So
yeah, and speaking of the testimonies, if people want to go see some of the testimonies, and in particular Dr. Milgram's testimony, they're all posted on my YouTube channel. It's Republic of Texas Tackling Education Nonsense. So if you just go to YouTube and search for Rotten Education, you'll find the channel. But Republic of Texas Tackling Education Nonsense, and all the videos of testimonies are posted there, or most of them are.
And you've done a tremendous service to the people of Texas by doing that, Randy. Okay, Lynn, tell us where we're going. Tell us why we have this social emotional learning going on, and what it's doing, where it's going.
Well, so first, I wanted to point out something when you're talking about pushing back. The only time I've seen my district, I've been asking them to do this for a long time, push back on the TEA and the federal encroachment. Push back, tell them, no, we're not going to do this. Don't accept the money because the money comes with the strings. We'll figure it out. The only time I've heard my superintendent talk about local control is recently with the mask mandates. So that's the only time I've ever seen them actually push back. And they're violating the law and the governor on this mask deal. So interesting that they pick and choose when they want to have local control. But how we got here with the social emotional learning, I think there's a huge focus on critical race theory. And it's not that we don't have those things going on in the schools, but really I think the overarching threat is social emotional learning. It's been here for longer than most people realize. I always say we don't have critical race theory in Richardson ISD, where my older two went, and my youngest is still there. But we have critical race or critical theory like language. It comes in through the diversity, equity, and inclusion department. Usually what districts will do is they'll take a trigger event and they'll use that as a reason to bring in this equity, diversity, and inclusion department. They'll hire a director, and with a big salary at the administration level, further bloating the administration. Meanwhile, when they talk about equity, they ignore the majority of our district is on free and reduced lunch, and we're a majority minority district, and our reading and math scores are tanking. And it's not just because of the learning loss from the pandemic. It's actually been going on for almost a decade, and I've been talking about it for years. I talked about it when I ran for school board in 2017, and it's still going on, but now they want to blame the pandemic. Oh, well, there's nothing we can do about that. The kids were sheltered at home, and that's why we have learning loss, and that's why our scores are bad. Well, that's true, but they were already there. So the way that social emotional learning comes in, which is part of the reason why our scores are tanking, is because they've shifted away from academics to the behavioral, to attitudes, values, beliefs, behaviors, how you feel rather than what you know and how you can demonstrate what you know. The way they do it is through professional development of the teachers. And so it's not necessarily coming in through the standards. It is coming in through the standards, and that's happened through the legislature, where they embed social emotional learning standards in the TEKS, in the education standards. But for the most part, it comes in through professional development, indoctrination of the teachers, then that trickles down into the classroom. They're trying to embed this in every course. They also have at the beginning of the day, like or usually in elementary school, it's at the beginning of the day, and they will literally call it social emotional learning. They'll talk about their feelings, how they feel that day, what's going on at home. It's a lot of invasive, these are invasive practices. Teachers have always addressed the social and emotional needs of children. And so no one's against that. We're not against that. And so it's not, they make it a false dilemma fallacy. If you don't want SEL taught in schools, then you must not care about kids' feelings and their emotions. Not true, not true at all. But they're doing it in other ways through assessments, through culture and climate surveys, constant data collection on the students. There are apps like Rhythm, and it's spelled RHITHM, I believe. And my friend Lee Spiller in Austin has been talking about this. We don't do that in Richardson ISD, but a lot of districts do this, where they collect tons of social emotional data on the children, behavioral data, which then follows the child throughout their education. So social emotional learning, it's embedded in math, it's embedded in language, language arts, English or ELAR. You'll see it everywhere. And then we wonder why our kids are being dumbed down, why they're not prepared for the workforce, why they're being remediated in college. Randy, Pat, you were talking about just the implications for our student, or for our adults who have been taught this way with math. The same goes for language. And so I saw it at the job ministry. I would have to help people with their resumes and interviewing and articulating through cover letters. Even our scientists, they talk about STEM. They're trying to put these kids in a track early on. That sounds good, but if they don't have the foundation, it's really putting the cart before the horse. And to have a really well-rounded scientist is important, because they're going to have to articulate their findings. They're going to have to communicate well. If we're putting a kid in STEM, on the STEM track in 4th grade, it's kind of like, if you have a pitcher, they've got a great arm, you take a 10-year-old and you wear that arm out, they're not going to be much of a pitcher down in, up in high school and down the road. They're going to be injured and they won't be as good of a player. So you got to develop their whole body. And so they're doing that with STEM. They're saying, okay, this kid shows promise in science, technology, engineering, or math. And so they pigeonhole them. That's not good for kids. They need a more well-rounded education. And then if they're already bent that way, they're going to do well. I can't stress enough, just this focus on equity. You hear it all the time. And I call it fakequity because I've been talking for a long time about the academic progress of Black and Brown students, and yet the Black and Brown trustees aren't talking about this. They're not talking about academics. They're talking about they talk about race all the time, but they never want to talk about how the kids are actually doing. And so to me, it's fakequity. It's empty platitudes, and I think it's actually quite racist, and it makes me angry. Because, I talk about they try to make it as though, it's the white affluent parents who are speaking out against critical race theory or social emotional learning, or even masks. They try to make it about a privilege thing. And it's really, it's an unfair label, because that's not what's going on here. I actually care very deeply about how all kids learn, and they say all means all, then just prove it, because they don't.
Yeah. Lynn, can you take us into the data collection part of what you research, and the importance of how the tablets that the kids learn off of is creating that data, and then what that data is being used for?
Sure. I've been involved in an organization, it's Parent Coalition for Student Privacy. And understanding years ago, after going down the rabbit hole, seeing that student data is the new oil. It's really a huge focus in education, and they do it through education technology. So the more devices, the push for one-to-one devices, that is an access point, and that data can be commodified. It's actually very lucrative. Every click, every move they make, everything they do on a device, Google, any kind of education technology app, all of that is an opportunity to access students. And so that can be monetized. But I mean, there are different players, different different reasons why they want the data. So, I could go any direction you want me to go on that. I will say that
we know that our Title I schools have been used for decades for the education system to make money off of.
Right.
And the accountability system has escalated that into the stratosphere. I mean, our Title I schools, that's where the money is really being made because of the outcomes and the data that's coming out of there. And the fact that there is an opportunity to turn each one of those Title I schools into a charter, which then opens up even more opportunities to make money. So we're dealing with children being a commodity.
Right.
And in the system that we have, the kid is a commodity. So can you speak to that and all the different players that are involved in this?
Yeah, so I focus a lot on why I call my podcast Social Impact is because I started figuring out that we were part of this global impact investing network, or at least the predators, those who are coming into the schools and wanting access to the data, such as the Commit Partnership. It's run by a former Goldman Sachs executive, Todd Williams, and he's the most powerful man in Texas education. His name is listed on the reference for Mike Morath, our TEA commissioner, appointed by the governor. Todd Williams has a collective impact nonprofit is what he calls it. And that's just code for social impact. And what that means is he has a data sharing agreement with most districts in the Metroplex, which means that our school districts hand over all kinds of private sensitive data on the students to him and his nonprofit Commit. Then we also hand it over to the TEA, who is also working with Commit and paying Commit, and they're accessing all kinds of student data, 16 million student level, or it's a lot of test and STAR test data. But they'll say it is not personally identifiable or it's been de-identified, but we know that that can be reverse engineered. So it's not necessarily the case. They're working with Microsoft, Azure, and they're doing this whole predictive analytics, machine learning, predictive profiling. All of that's happening at the TEA and in Dallas. As far as the social impact investing, what they do is they will take any social ill, such as pre-K or homelessness, any kind of poverty, crime, and they'll turn it into an investing opportunity. So investors come up front, put the money up front. They partner with a governmental agency, a school district, the public-private partnership is what it is, and they will have some sort of outcome that they want to achieve, and they will measure and track and collect data on this particular, whatever, whoever it is that's in the model and these people don't know they're part of a human experiment, but they're doing it in all levels of the schools. And so it's outcomes based. And so they have smart contracts set up, an agreement. And if they meet their defined goals and outcomes, then the investor gets paid a return because it supposedly saves the district. It can save the district money. But it just lines the pockets of the private sector. So it's a way to shift public funds into private hands. So that's a lot of what I've been focusing on. If people don't know it, because it comes in the form of these euphemisms, they'll say like Early Matters Dallas or pre-K for SA San Antonio. It'll say, like after 8 to educate for homeless students. So you don't know that that's a social impact bond that you're seeing, or a pay for success scheme. You just think, oh, they care about homeless kids. So, but the parents don't know, and the kids don't know that they're being fed into a data tracking, a model that tracks them from beginning to end. And they can, they usually have their people as intermediaries that can, that helps them kind of skew the data in their favor.
That's amazing information. And
Sad.
Bring up the point.
I could tie it to math real quick. So
Okay,
math
yeah,
innovation zones of the
please.
TEA. So Randy, we've talked about reasoning mind. So basically the Texas Education Agency partnered with Tan Parker and Van Taylor. They pushed a bill through the Senate and the House. The Senate made it through Senate Bill 1318, math innovation zones. Who doesn't love innovation? But what it is a social impact bond. They hired a social impact bond director at the TEA who came from a charter school, model KIP and one of the others. And so this is a math program. Well, they hired, I think they did maybe 3 vendors, Reasoning Mind and IXL or Excel Math and something else. And so those kids are being fed into an impact investing scheme where investors will turn a profit at the end. I'm sure Van Taylor's kids who are in an elite private school in Dallas would never be he would never endorse this for his own children, but that's how, you're saying the kids in public schools are being targeted for these predatory models. That's an example.
And there's nothing innovative about the math in any of those programs. It's just that you can track the progress.
Right.
Tracking the progress. Yeah, and that's how they make money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know. You wanted me to go
well
again? Into something else.
I think we're gonna begin winding down. We're hitting the hour mark, and I want to wrap it up by talking about really the dereliction of duty taking place by school board members and superintendents, not recognizing or not pushing back against these powers that are controlling our education system and turning our kids into commodities and dumbing down their education and making them crippled in their math abilities, which is going to have tremendous implications for the future with our engineers and our architects and the people that we depend on for so much. But we don't realize how much of our economy is wrapped up in engineering. And if we have to outsource everything because our education models have been inferior, and they can't do the work, they can't make the calculations, then where are we in terms of being a free society? So it has huge implications. And our school board members to get along is the model of TASB, Texas Association of School Boards. And they're a lobbying group that works with all of our school board members to train them in Lone Star governance, which is the model that TEA wants to be used by all the school boards. And they want to be able to vote as one and no one object. And all of this is taught and trained through TASB and the different other training institutions that we have, like Holdsworth. All of these institutions are involved in keeping the status quo in place. And so, Lynn, your thoughts on school boards and their duty to their community, their duty to their children, their duty to their teachers.
Yeah, I've been tracking TAS and TASB for years, and I've proposed at the legislature that we defund them. They do talk about ending taxpayer-funded lobbying groups, but they left out education in that bill. And so that's the most important one, and that's where the bulk of our taxes go. So if they would eliminate TASB and keep our money local, we would not. And I'm not against the economies of scale that it can bring, but that's not what it is anymore. It's turned into a beast that actually works against us. They lawyer up against us, and they're behind a lot of the mask, the pushback against the governor mandating they're trying to mandate masks, and they're flouting the governor, and TASB is behind a lot of that. So yes, I would vote that we defund them and stop sending our tax dollars to them. And our school boards, mine voted 7-0 in lockstep for 6 years. There was only one no vote. And I exposed that when I ran. They are a rubber stamping board. They're taught to be rubber stampers at TASB. They go to the team of 8 training. Them plus the superintendent is a kumbaya board of 8. And that's what's happening in my district. And that's why kids are not being taught as they're supposed to be. No one's asking what they're learning, how they're learning, and who's profiting off of that. And they spent 2 hours the other night talking about masks and how they're going to double down on kids wearing masks. Finally, one trustee did say, when are we going to talk about learning? Because we have not been focusing on the kids and their academic progress. And that's criminal. And no wonder we've got a dumbed down society.
Yeah. Well, the challenge ahead is great. And what I would hope that any candidate running for school board would commit themselves to would be to work to try to uncover all the things that we're talking about in their district and work to push back. At the very least, we need to push back. There needs to be talk of what can we do. We all know what should be done. We need to get rid of the accountability system. We need to get rid of Common Core. We need to get the teachers back to teaching true academics. Put it in the hands of the teachers. The teachers can teach Johnny how to read. They know how to do it. But if they have their hands handcuffed by a curriculum that's inferior, then Johnny may not learn how to read. But that's
And if they don't, if they come out of the teaching colleges not knowing how to teach kids to read, then identify that at the district level. Have some sort of way to test that and then fix it. Yeah. We would gladly spend the money on helping our teachers teach how to read. Yeah. No issue with that.
At the rock bottom level, we need to be having conversations in the school boards, in the audiences that go to the school board meetings about the state of our education, not just social emotional learning,
right,
but also academics and how it's being controlled. And people are making profits off of especially our Title I schools, which is complete inequity. Don't talk to me about equity until we fix that situation and quit shaming our Title I schools because of their outcomes. So we need to have these conversations. And so school board members need to understand where it's headed and they need to get on board with it or find themselves not a school board member anymore.
Yeah, our board president stepped down and I couldn't be happier. She wasn't doing her job. So bye-bye.
Yeah, very good. Well, okay, guys, it's been a great conversation and really appreciate all that you do. Randy, thank you so much. Your contribution to math education and trying to create awareness has been nothing short of amazing. And Lynn, the work that you're doing with social impact and bringing to the attention of the public that our kids are commodities and they are being made profits for people that others have no idea are involved in public education. So these public-private partnerships are being exposed and you're doing it, Lynn, and there are others doing it as well. But I wanted to highlight you in this particular video so that you could make some type of a sense out of it to the people that are going to be watching the video in the future. And we hope it goes far and wide. We hope that a lot of people can view what we've talked about today.
Thank you, Pat. You should be the TEA commissioner if Alan West or somebody else wins governor. Boot Morath and put Pat. I've already talked to Alan West about you.
I know you have.
We'll see.
That'd be great.
That'd be great. He said, "Do you want the job?" I was like, "No, I'm not qualified, but I know somebody who is."
Yeah. Well, I would love to talk to Alan West, not about being the TEA commissioner, but about what he plans to do for education if he gets elected.
You can be on the committee to select.
I see him as a very viable candidate.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we can stay on and talk a little bit before y'all take off for the day. Where is my? Here we go.